The fastest way to lose someone is to help them become the person who believes they no longer need you. My name is Michael Carter, and the night my wife filed for divorce was also the night her company celebrated the biggest deal in its history. $100 million. That's the number everyone kept repeating as if it were some kind of miracle. It floated through the ballroom with the champagne bubbles and the laughter, bouncing from table to table beneath chandeliers the size of pickup trucks. People were smiling so hard their faces looked tired. Executives were shaking hands. Investors were taking pictures. Reporters were gathering near the stage. And right in the center of it all stood Olivia Carter, my wife of 14 years, wearing an emerald dress and the kind of smile that only appears when someone believes they've finally reached the top of the mountain. The ballroom overlooked downtown Dallas, 40 floors above the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, thousands of lights stretched across the Texas night like stars scattered across black velvet. The room smelled of expensive cologne, fresh flowers, and success. Everyone wanted a piece of it. Everyone wanted to be close to the woman who had just helped secure a contract worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Olivia stood near the stage surrounded by board members and senior executives. Every few seconds another person approached to congratulate her. Another handshake. Another photo. Another compliment. From across the room, I watched her laugh and thank them. She looked comfortable in that spotlight. Maybe too comfortable. The strange thing wasn't that she was successful. I had always known she would be. Olivia was smart, ambitious, disciplined, and relentless when she wanted something. The strange thing was how quickly success can change the temperature of a room. 6 months earlier, she still called me during lunch breaks. 3 months earlier, she still asked about my day. A month earlier, she still sat beside me on the couch and talked about future vacations. But standing there that night, surrounded by applause and flashing cameras, she looked like someone who had already left before she officially walked away. I should have seen it sooner. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The shorter conversations, the distracted smiles, the way she started introducing me less often at company events, the way she spoke about her future without saying the word "our." People think marriages fall apart in dramatic moments. Most of the time they don't. Most of the time they erode quietly, one conversation at a time, until one day you realize the distance between two people is measured in miles instead of inches. A waiter offered me another glass of whiskey. I accepted it and thanked him. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. Across the room, Olivia glanced in my direction. For a second our eyes met. 14 years together reduced to a glance that lasted less than a heartbeat. Then she looked away. A few minutes later she walked toward me. The crowd seemed to part naturally around her. Her smile remained perfectly composed. Anyone watching would have assumed she was coming to introduce me to someone important. Instead, she handed me a sealed envelope. I looked down at it. My name was printed neatly across the front. "What's this?" I asked. Her expression never changed. "Something I've been meaning to give you." The noise of the ballroom continued around us. Laughter, music, glasses touching. Nobody noticed the shift happening between us. I opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers. For a moment, the room seemed strangely quiet despite the hundreds of voices surrounding us. I read the first page, then the second. My heartbeat remained steady. My hands didn't shake. Years of business negotiations had taught me that panic rarely improves a situation. Olivia folded her arms gently. "I think it's time we move on," she said. Simple words. Calm words. The kind that sound rehearsed because they usually are. I looked back toward the stage where a giant screen displayed the company's new achievement in glowing gold letters. $100 million. The room was celebrating a beginning. Meanwhile, my marriage was ending. What nobody in that ballroom understood, including Olivia, was that this night would become the most expensive victory of her life. I looked up from the papers and studied Olivia's face. 14 years together gives you a unique ability to recognize when someone has rehearsed a conversation 100 times in their head. There was no anger in her expression, no hesitation, no sadness, just certainty. That was what surprised me most. Not the documents, not the timing, the certainty, as if the outcome had already been decided long before she placed that envelope in my hands. "You picked an interesting night," I said. She glanced toward the stage where another round of applause erupted from the crowd. "I did not want to keep pretending," she replied. Her voice was smooth, controlled, almost professional. like a person delivering quarterly results instead of ending a marriage. I nodded slowly and folded the papers back into the envelope. Around us, servers moved between tables carrying trays of champagne. The band transitioned into another song. A giant screen continued displaying images from the contract signing ceremony earlier that day. Everyone was celebrating a future they believed was guaranteed. Olivia followed my eyes toward the screen. "Things are changing, Michael." "They always do," I said. For a brief moment, she looked uncomfortable, as though she expected an argument and did not know what to do without one. People often prepare themselves for conflict. They rarely prepare themselves for calm. Before she could respond, a group of executives approached. The company's chief operations officer, 2 vice presidents, and several department heads surrounded her with congratulations. One of them looked at me and smiled politely. "You must be proud of her," he said. "Very proud," I answered. The statement was true. That was the complicated part. I was proud of her. Proud of the years she spent working late. Proud of the weekends sacrificed to projects. Proud of the discipline that helped her rise through the company. What hurt was not her success. It was the assumption that success required leaving everything else behind. The group continued talking. Someone joked that Olivia was now too important for ordinary people. Everyone laughed. Another executive commented that she would probably be running the entire company within a few years. More laughter. Then came the comment that changed the atmosphere. A senior manager raised his glass and grinned. "Well, if anyone deserves early retirement, it is Michael. Looks like your wife finally made it big enough to carry both of you." The people around him chuckled. Not cruelly, not maliciously, just comfortably. The way people laugh when they believe they are stating an obvious truth. I noticed Olivia did not correct him. She simply smiled and accepted another congratulations. That told me more than the divorce papers had. The manager continued. "You picked the right spouse, my friend." More laughter followed. I smiled politely. Years ago, those comments might have bothered me. Years ago, I might have felt the need to explain myself. But something strange happens when disappointment becomes clear. The need to defend yourself disappears. You start listening instead. You start learning. The conversation drifted elsewhere. New guests arrived. More photos were taken. Olivia was pulled away toward the stage for another interview. I remained near the back of the ballroom, nursing the same glass of whiskey. From a distance, I watched reporters gather around her. Camera flashes reflected against the windows overlooking the city. She looked confident, answering questions about leadership, vision, and the future. The future. Everyone kept talking about the future. What none of them understood was that the future rests on foundations built years earlier. Most people admire the skyscraper. Few people ask who poured the concrete. I left the ballroom shortly after 10 o'clock. No dramatic scene. No confrontation. No emotional speech. Just a quiet walk through a marble lobby filled with celebration banners and floral arrangements. Outside, warm Texas air greeted me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Traffic moved steadily through downtown Dallas. Headlights stretched along the streets like rivers of light. I stood there for a moment and looked back up at the tower. 40 floors above me, the celebration continued. Olivia probably believed she had just begun the best chapter of her life. Maybe she had. Maybe she had not. The truth was, there were pieces of this story she did not know. Pieces almost nobody knew. And as I climbed into my truck and placed the envelope on the passenger seat beside me, I found myself thinking about decisions made 15 years earlier, signatures placed on documents long forgotten, and promises that had quietly shaped everything that came afterward. The drive home took 32 minutes. I know because I watched every mile marker, every traffic light, every reflection sliding across my windshield. Dallas looked different that night. Not darker, not brighter, just clearer. Sometimes a single moment rearranges the way you see everything that came before it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the envelope no longer felt like a surprise. It felt like confirmation. The house sat exactly as we had left it that morning. The porch light glowed softly above the front steps. The flower beds Olivia used to care about lined the walkway. A neighbor's sprinkler clicked rhythmically somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary sights. Yet standing there with divorce papers in my hand, the place felt strangely distant. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Silence greeted me. The living room was immaculate. Olivia had always preferred order. Pillows arranged perfectly. Picture frames aligned. Not a single magazine out of place. I loosened my tie and set the envelope on the kitchen counter. For a long moment, I simply stood there looking at it. 14 years reduced to legal paperwork and signatures waiting to happen. Most people assume the hardest part of a marriage ending is the paperwork. It is not. The hardest part is realizing that the future you imagined no longer exists. I poured myself a glass of water and walked into my home office. The room had barely changed in a decade. Dark wood shelves lined one wall. Framed certificates hung above a cabinet filled with old files. A leather chair sat behind a desk worn smooth by years of use. This was where I came when I needed to think. And that night, I had a lot to think about. I opened a drawer and removed a small metal key. It looked insignificant, the kind of thing most people would overlook. I turned it over in my hand for several seconds before crossing the room to a built-in cabinet hidden behind a row of business books. The lock clicked softly. Inside sat a fireproof box. Dust coated the lid. I had not opened it in years. The hinges creaked slightly as I lifted the top. Folders rested inside, neatly organized and untouched. Contracts, agreements, corporate records, trust documents, names and signatures from a chapter of my life most people never knew existed. I stared at them without touching anything. 15 years earlier, before Olivia became a rising executive, before anyone celebrated $100 million contracts, before the company occupied a glass tower overlooking downtown Dallas, there had been a very different reality. Back then there was no luxury ballroom, no reporters, no executive titles, just a handful of people working from rented office space with stained carpet and unreliable air conditioning. I remember the smell of burnt coffee and printer toner. I remember folding tables serving as conference desks. I remember investors saying no. I remember payroll weeks when every dollar mattered. Those memories still felt real to me. What surprised me was how distant they seemed to everyone else. Success has a way of rewriting history. People only see the finished building. They forget the years spent pouring foundations underground where nobody was watching. I sat down and opened the first folder. Inside were documents dated nearly 15 years ago. My signature appeared beside several others. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. I traced a finger across one page and smiled faintly. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood something. Olivia believed she was walking away from the past. What she did not understand was that the past was still connected to the future. Decisions made years ago have long shadows. Sometimes those shadows remain invisible until the exact moment they matter most. Outside the office window, the neighborhood remained quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the night. I leaned back in my chair and closed the folder carefully. The celebration downtown would probably continue for hours. Executives would toast their success. Reporters would publish glowing headlines by morning. Olivia would likely receive dozens more congratulations before the night ended. And yet, sitting there surrounded by forgotten records and old agreements, I had a feeling none of them fully understood what had just begun. Neither did Olivia. But soon enough, everyone would. The next morning arrived with the kind of quiet that only exists before the rest of the world wakes up. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long golden lines across the hardwood floor. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee and a folder that had not seen daylight in nearly a decade. Most people assume success happens in a straight line. They imagine a talented person climbing higher and higher until one day they reach the top. Reality is messier than that. Success usually begins with uncertainty, sacrifice, and 100 decisions nobody notices. As I opened the folder, memories returned with surprising clarity. 15 years earlier, I was 32 years old and working 70-hour weeks trying to build something from almost nothing. The company everyone celebrated now had started inside a leased office smaller than most suburban garages. We had 6 employees, aging computers, and enough financial pressure to keep everyone awake at night. Back then, nobody cared about titles. Nobody cared about prestige. We cared about survival. I remember sitting across folding tables covered with spreadsheets and projections. I remember meeting potential investors who smiled politely before declining. I remember driving hundreds of miles across Texas for meetings that produced nothing except another tank of empty gas and another lesson about patience. Those years shaped me more than any success that came afterward. Olivia was there too. We were newly married then. She believed in the vision even when it looked impossible. She worked hard, learned quickly, and earned opportunities through determination. The difference was that she loved the spotlight while I preferred the structure behind it. I never wanted to be the face of anything. I wanted to build systems that lasted. That difference became important later. Around year 3, the company finally began gaining traction. Revenue increased. Investors returned calls. Opportunities expanded. With growth came new decisions. Some obvious, others hidden beneath layers of legal paperwork that most people ignored. One of our advisors, a brilliant corporate attorney named Richard Wallace, taught me something valuable during that period. He said that ownership and control were rarely the same thing. Most people focused on visible leadership. Smart people paid attention to structure. I remembered those words because they influenced several decisions that followed. As the company expanded, we created agreements designed to protect long-term stability. Trust arrangements, governance provisions, approval mechanisms. Nothing dramatic, nothing secretive, just careful planning created during a time when failure remained a real possibility. The irony was that the better the company performed, the less attention people paid to those foundations. New executives arrived. New departments formed. Public recognition grew. Meanwhile, the documents remained exactly where they had always been. Quiet. Unnoticed. Waiting. I took another sip of coffee and looked through old photographs stored in the folder. There was one picture of our original team standing outside the first office. We looked exhausted. Young. Optimistic. The building behind us was forgettable. The future ahead of us was uncertain. Yet looking at that picture, I saw something that had disappeared over the years. Gratitude. Nobody expected luxury. Nobody expected recognition. We were simply grateful to have another chance to keep building. Somewhere along the way, that mindset changed. Success has a subtle effect on people. It can convince them that today's reality existed forever. It erases memories of struggle. It transforms blessings into expectations. Olivia was not the only person affected by that transformation. Entire organizations fall into the same trap. They begin believing the current chapter is the whole story. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with 3 messages from friends who had attended the celebration. Each congratulated Olivia on the contract. One asked how I was handling the divorce announcement. News traveled quickly in executive circles. I responded politely and set the phone aside. There would be time for conversations later. For now, I was interested in something else. Understanding exactly how the past connected to the future. Because the more documents I reviewed, the more certain I became that everyone involved was focusing on the wrong event. They believed the contract signed yesterday would determine what happened next. They were mistaken. The decisions that mattered most had been made years earlier by people who understood that strong foundations are invisible until the moment they are tested. 3 days passed before Olivia and I sat across from each other again. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room at the office of her attorney. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Dallas, and morning sunlight reflected off neighboring glass towers. Everything about the room felt expensive, polished, and controlled. A long walnut table separated us. 2 attorneys sat nearby reviewing documents while speaking in calm professional voices. Olivia looked confident. Not arrogant exactly. More like someone who believed the difficult part was already finished. She wore a tailored navy suit and carried herself with the same executive composure that had impressed investors and board members for years. If a stranger walked into that room, they would probably assume she was negotiating a business acquisition rather than ending a marriage. The conversation remained civil. Property disclosures, financial statements, timelines, legal procedures, ordinary topics that somehow felt strange when attached to 14 years of shared history. I answered every question directly. No arguments, no emotional speeches, no attempts to change her mind. The calmer I remained, the more uncomfortable Olivia seemed to become. Eventually, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "You are taking this better than I expected," she said. One of the attorneys glanced up briefly before returning to his notes. I folded my hands on the table. People adapt. She nodded, though her expression suggested she was searching for something beneath the answer. Perhaps she expected resentment. Perhaps she expected regret. What she found instead was patience. The meeting ended shortly after noon. As everyone gathered their papers, Olivia stopped me near the elevator lobby. For a moment, we stood alone, overlooking the city. Thousands of vehicles moved below us like streams of light and steel. "I hope you understand why I am doing this," she said quietly. The statement lingered between us. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded sincere. That was the strange part. She genuinely believed her decision made sense. I looked out across the skyline before answering. I understand more than you think. Her expression softened slightly. Then the elevator doors opened, and the moment disappeared. That afternoon, I returned home and continued reviewing old records. The deeper I looked, the more connections emerged. Agreements linked to agreements. Decisions linked to decisions. Most of it was routine corporate planning created years earlier by people focused on stability rather than recognition. Yet one detail continued drawing my attention. A scheduled board meeting set for the following month. Normally, such meetings attracted little interest. Quarterly reviews, strategic updates, executive reports, the usual rhythm of corporate life. This one felt different. Several agenda items related directly to the newly signed contract. Large projects create large responsibilities, and large responsibilities often require formal approvals. I made a few phone calls that evening. Nothing dramatic, just conversations with people I had known for many years. Former advisors, longtime associates, individuals who remembered the company's early days before success transformed everyone's perspective. The reactions were interesting. Some were surprised to hear from me. Others sounded almost relieved. One conversation lasted nearly an hour. Another lasted only 10 minutes. Yet a common theme emerged from all of them. The people who remembered the foundation understood something the newer executives did not. Structures matter. Processes matter. History matters. Long after the calls ended, I sat alone on the back patio watching the Texas sunset fade beyond the rooftops. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and summer heat. Somewhere nearby, children laughed while playing basketball in a driveway. Ordinary sounds. Familiar sounds. The kind that remind you life continues moving forward whether you are ready or not. My phone buzzed once. A news alert appeared on the screen. Olivia's company had received another wave of positive media coverage. Analysts praised the contract. Investors celebrated the projected growth. Headlines described a bright future. I read the article carefully before setting the phone aside. The optimism was understandable. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. Momentum, confidence, expansion. But experience had taught me that the most important parts of any structure are often the parts nobody sees. And as the board meeting drew closer, I found myself thinking less about the headlines and more about what would happen when the people celebrating the future finally took a closer look at the past. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. 2 weeks remained, yet the entire company was already treating it like a formality. News coverage surrounding the contract continued growing. Industry publications praised the leadership team. Analysts predicted record expansion. Investors talked about future opportunities as though they were guaranteed. Confidence filled every conversation. Confidence can be a useful thing. It can also be dangerous when it convinces people to stop asking questions. During those 2 weeks, I stayed busy. Not with revenge. Not with planning some dramatic confrontation. I simply organized information. Every agreement. Every amendment. Every record connected to decisions made during the company's earliest years. Some evenings I worked until midnight inside my office. Other nights, I sat quietly on the patio reviewing notes while the neighborhood settled into darkness around me. The process was strangely calming. Facts have a way of cutting through emotion. The more I reviewed, the less anger I felt. In its place came clarity. Meanwhile, Olivia's life seemed to accelerate. Her photographs appeared in business magazines. She attended interviews, networking events, and investor dinners. Occasionally our paths crossed because divorce has a way of forcing practical conversations. Most of those interactions remained polite, professional even, yet something subtle had changed. She carried herself differently now. The excitement surrounding the contract seemed to follow her everywhere. One afternoon, we met to review additional paperwork. As we sat across from each other, she mentioned that the board meeting would likely approve several major initiatives connected to future expansion. Her tone suggested certainty rather than expectation. I listened quietly. "A lot of things are about to change," she said. I smiled slightly. "That seems to be the theme lately." She laughed softly. The conversation moved on. Neither of us discussed what was waiting beneath the surface. A few days later, I received a call from Richard Wallace. Hearing his voice brought back memories of conference rooms, legal drafts, and long nights spent building frameworks nobody else cared about. We spoke for nearly an hour. Most of the conversation focused on process, procedure, governance, the kinds of topics that sound boring until they suddenly become important. Before ending the call, Richard paused. "You know," he said, "most people spend their lives focusing on what is visible. Very few understand the value of what exists behind the curtain." I looked across my office toward the cabinet containing the old files. That has always been true. After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city. Dark shapes rolled across the horizon, while distant thunder echoed beyond the suburbs. The weather forecast predicted rain by evening. As the first drops touched the windows, another news alert appeared on my phone. Olivia had been featured in a major business publication. The article described her as one of the industry's rising stars. It highlighted leadership, vision, and the company's remarkable future. I read every word carefully. Then I noticed something interesting. Not a single paragraph mentioned the structures supporting that future. Not one reference to governance. Not one mention of the mechanisms protecting long-term control. The article focused entirely on appearances. Success often encourages that mistake. People become fascinated by the spotlight and forget to look at the stage beneath it. The rain intensified throughout the evening. Water streamed down the glass, while flashes of lightning illuminated the backyard. Sitting there alone, I found myself thinking about foundations again. A strong building rarely attracts attention on calm days. People admire the exterior, the architecture, the view from the top floor. Only when pressure arrives do they begin noticing what holds everything together. The board meeting was now less than a week away. Executives were preparing presentations. Analysts were preparing forecasts. Olivia was preparing for what she believed would be another step upward. And somewhere beneath all that confidence, hidden beneath years of assumptions and forgotten history, old decisions were quietly waiting for their turn to speak. Tuesday arrived beneath a clear Texas sky. Downtown Dallas shimmered in the morning sunlight as executives, board members, and advisors filled the company's headquarters. The atmosphere felt almost celebratory. People moved through the lobby carrying coffee cups and presentation folders, exchanging confident predictions about the future. Everywhere I looked, I saw certainty. The contract had become more than a business achievement. It had become a symbol, a promise that growth would continue exactly as everyone expected. I arrived 20 minutes before the meeting and took a seat near the back of the boardroom. Several people recognized me. Most offered polite greetings. A few seemed surprised to see me there at all. That did not bother me. For years I had become accustomed to being overlooked. The boardroom itself was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Dallas skyline. A polished conference table stretched nearly 30 feet across the center of the room. Large monitors displayed charts, forecasts, and projections tied to the company's newest initiatives. At precisely 9 o'clock, the meeting began. The chairman opened with routine business, financial reports, operational updates, revenue projections. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. Olivia sat near the center of the table. She looked confident and composed, answering questions with the ease of someone who knew she was performing well. Several directors praised her leadership. Others discussed expansion opportunities connected to the recent contract. For nearly an hour, the conversation remained focused on growth. Then the meeting reached the section that mattered: governance review. Most people in the room treated it as another administrative formality. Several executives glanced at their phones. Others shuffled papers while waiting for the discussion to end. That changed when Richard Wallace stood and approached the screen. His expression remained calm, professional, deliberate. He thanked the board and began reviewing several structural provisions connected to long-term company governance. At first, nobody appeared concerned. Then he displayed the first document. A quiet stillness settled across the room. Several directors leaned forward. Olivia narrowed her eyes slightly. Richard continued speaking. He explained how specific authority mechanisms had been established during the company's earliest years to protect core assets and strategic partnerships. More documents appeared. Dates, signatures, amendments, historical agreements. Each one connected to decisions made long before many current executives had even joined the company. The room grew noticeably quieter with every slide. Questions began appearing. One director asked for clarification regarding approval requirements tied to major strategic actions. Another requested additional context about governance oversight. Richard answered each question carefully, methodically. Then he displayed a document I had not seen projected on a screen in more than a decade. Several board members exchanged confused glances. One executive removed his glasses and leaned closer. Another opened a printed packet and began rapidly turning pages. For the first time all morning, confidence gave way to concentration. Olivia's posture changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. She stopped taking notes. Her attention fixed completely on the presentation. Richard continued outlining the historical framework supporting certain corporate authorities. None of it was dramatic. No shocking accusations. No confrontation. Just facts. Documented facts. The kind that become difficult to ignore once everyone can see them at the same time. A director finally asked the question that had been forming in the room for the past 20 minutes. Are you saying these provisions are still active? Richard nodded. Yes. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that only appears when assumptions begin colliding with reality. Another question followed. Then another. Discussion spread across the table. Executives reviewed documents. Directors requested clarification. Advisors referenced historical records. Piece by piece, the room began understanding something that had been forgotten for years. The company everyone was celebrating had not simply appeared out of nowhere. It rested upon structures that remained fully intact. Structures designed specifically for moments exactly like this. Across the table, Olivia stared at the documents in front of her. For the first time since the night of the celebration, I saw uncertainty enter her expression. Not fear, not panic, just realization. The kind that arrives when a person discovers there is far more to a story than they originally believed. And as the discussion continued, it became increasingly clear that the future everyone had been talking about was about to look very different than expected. The discussion that followed lasted nearly 2 hours. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody stormed out of the room. Real power shifts rarely look dramatic in the moment. They look like people quietly rereading documents they thought they already understood. One director requested a short recess. Another asked for additional legal review. Several executives who had spent the morning speaking confidently about future initiatives suddenly became far more cautious with their words. The atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier, everyone had been talking about expansion. Now they were talking about authority, approvals, and governance obligations. The difference mattered. I remained mostly silent. There was no reason to interrupt the process. Facts were doing all the work themselves. Across the table, Olivia continued reviewing the materials placed before her. Every few minutes, she turned another page. Then another. The certainty that had surrounded her for weeks seemed to fade little by little. Not because anyone was attacking her. Not because anyone was trying to embarrass her. Simply because reality was proving more complicated than she had believed. Around noon, the chairman requested a summary from Richard Wallace. Richard stood and calmly explained the situation. Certain strategic actions connected to the company's most valuable assets required compliance with governance provisions established years earlier. Those provisions remained active. They had never been removed, replaced, or invalidated. Multiple directors exchanged long looks. One executive asked why nobody had discussed these requirements earlier. Richard's answer was simple. The documents had always existed. They had simply been forgotten by people who assumed they no longer mattered. That answer seemed to land heavily around the room. Success has a strange way of creating blind spots. When everything goes well, people stop checking the foundation. They focus entirely on the view from the top floor. The board eventually voted to postpone several major decisions until a complete review could be completed. The announcement felt almost surreal. Just weeks earlier, everyone had assumed approval would be automatic. Now timelines were changing. Strategies were being reconsidered. Meetings were being rescheduled. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. Yet the momentum everyone had celebrated suddenly slowed. Sometimes that is all it takes. A single pause. A single realization. A single reminder that growth and control are not always the same thing. When the meeting finally adjourned, people left the boardroom in small groups. Conversations filled the hallway. Advisors spoke quietly with directors. Executives compared notes. Questions circulated everywhere. I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. Before I reached the elevator, I heard my name. Olivia stood several feet away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The busy hallway seemed strangely distant. She looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like someone trying to reconcile two different versions of reality at the same time. How long? She finally asked. I knew exactly what she meant. The documents have existed for 15 years, I answered. Her eyes searched my face. You never mentioned any of this. I nodded slowly. Nobody asked. The answer was not meant to be clever. It was simply true. She looked away toward the windows overlooking downtown Dallas. Traffic moved below us. Construction cranes dotted the horizon. The city continued functioning exactly as it had that morning. Yet something between us had changed. Olivia was beginning to understand that the story she had been telling herself was incomplete. The company was not just the result of recent success. It was the result of thousands of decisions stretching back years. Some visible, many invisible. I thought I understood everything, she said quietly. I looked out across the skyline beside her. Most people do. Neither of us spoke after that. Eventually, she returned to the boardroom while I headed toward the elevators. As the doors closed, I caught one final glimpse of the city beyond the glass. Sunlight reflected from hundreds of windows across downtown. The future was still there. The opportunities were still there. The company still had every chance to succeed. But one thing had changed forever. The assumptions that had carried people comfortably forward for years had finally been replaced by understanding. And once people see the foundation beneath the building, they can never pretend it is not there. 6 months later, the view outside my window looked very different. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. The divorce was finalized quietly. No dramatic courtroom battle. No public spectacle. Just signatures, paperwork, and two people officially stepping on as separate paths. Life has a way of moving forward whether you are ready or not. The company completed its governance review. Several projects were restructured. New procedures were implemented. The contract eventually moved forward, although not in the way many people originally expected. The headlines faded. The excitement faded. The endless predictions faded. Reality replaced momentum, just as it always does. As for Olivia, I heard updates occasionally through mutual friends and industry contacts. She remained successful. Intelligent people rarely lose their abilities overnight. But success looked different now. There was more caution in the decisions being made. More respect for details that had once been overlooked. More awareness that every visible achievement rests on foundations built by countless unseen efforts. I never celebrated any of it. There was nothing to celebrate. Contrary to what many people believe, victory is not watching someone else struggle. Victory is waking up one morning and realizing their choices no longer control your happiness. That realization arrived gradually. First came peace. Then came freedom. Then came gratitude. I sold the old house and purchased a smaller property outside the city. Nothing extravagant. Just open land, quiet mornings, and enough distance from downtown to hear birds instead of traffic. Most mornings began the same way. Coffee on the porch. Sunrise stretching across the horizon. A notebook resting beside me. For years I had spent my life helping build things for other people. Companies. Careers. Opportunities. For the first time in a very long time, I was building something for myself. One evening, almost a year after that board meeting, I found myself standing on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the Texas hills. The sky glowed orange and gold. A warm breeze moved through the trees. The world felt calm. My phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. At first I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. It was from Olivia. The message was short. No long explanations. No emotional speeches. Just a few simple sentences. She thanked me for the years we spent together. She acknowledged things she had not fully understood before. And she wished me well. I read the message twice before placing the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked out across the property again. The strange thing was that I felt no anger. No bitterness. No desire to revisit the past. Just appreciation for the lesson. Some people enter your life to stay forever. Others enter your life to teach you something before leaving. Both can be valuable if you learn from them. As darkness settled across the landscape, I thought about the night everything began. The ballroom, the celebration, the divorce papers, the certainty in Olivia's eyes. At the time, it felt like the ending of a story. Looking back, it was actually the beginning of a different one. The lesson was never about contracts, money, or corporate power. It was about understanding your own value even when other people forget it. It was about remembering that character matters more than recognition. Foundations matter more than appearances, and patience often reveals truths that emotion never can. So now I want to ask you something. If you found yourself in Michael's position, would you have reacted the same way, or would you have handled things differently? Let me know what you think. And if stories like this remind you that quiet strength often speaks louder than pride, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next journey. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones nobody sees except the person who lived through them. As for me, I finished my coffee, watched the last light fade beyond the horizon, and stepped forward into a future that finally belonged to me.